So we are here for the senior meeting. These are the senior profiles up here that we'll talk about in just a second. However, I want to go through a couple things with you guys. So here's kind of an idea. Let me actually pull over into this so I can actually move the slides forward and back. I'm going to go through a couple different things. How many of you guys came to the junior meeting that we had? Okay, most of you guys. Okay, and that's good. Some of this, like I said, will probably be a little bit of a review. But right now, it's kind of probably when I want your memory to be the freshest when you're working with the kids. It also helps refresh my memory as well. Believe it or not, this is a cycle for us too. So kind of have to remember all the stuff that we need to be doing and get things going. But we're going to talk about some dates and deadlines, some important things that you guys are going to want to know as parents, and then also for students as well. There will also be give you guys some ideas of what students are up against is not the right word, but kind of what some of the competition levels, what are some of the things, not to like scare or make people anxious about the process, but more to just have an informed idea of what college and what senior year and what the different levels of college really look like realistically in today's day and age. I think sometimes we go into it on two ends of a spectrum. I feel like the parents tend to go in like uber critical and like, my kid's never going to get into these schools. And the kids come in and like, I'm going to breeze through all these applications, no big deal. And so I'm hoping for kind of somewhere right in the middle of that. All right. So that's kind of the goal, is to kind of like look at where we stand, but also encourage us like, this is not out of the realm of reality. We'll look at the two primary state schools. Okay. So the UCs and CSUs kind of lay out a little bit of what to expect with those particular applications. Those are two of our more popular, most filled out applications in our school. So we're spending a little bit of time on that. We'll talk a little about junior college as well in that process. We don't spend a ton of time on trade schools. We do have a junior college and trade school particular night that we'll set up probably in October, where I actually have Christopher Old, who's from Sierra College, and he'll come in and actually share more specifics about that junior college process as well. Because of the timeline with the college stuff, that's really what we kind of try to hit hard going into it, into this fall time frame, and then kind of looking at some of the important things just to know and remember as we go through this senior year, especially in the fall. Also know that we are going to touch a little bit on things like financial aid, but we will be having a financial aid meeting on October 4th as well. That's going to be very specific for that topic. So we'll talk a little bit about it, and I'm happy to answer questions, but just know that we'll spend probably about an hour specifically on financial aid right after the FAFSA opens on October 1st. Okay, but we'll talk briefly about it. So I already missed my summer. I don't know about you guys. So this is Joel. He is now about 15 months old. So I got to spend all of summer playing daddy daycare, which, believe it or not, is much harder than my actual job. So he's up and walking, he's tearing around. That started at the beginning of my summer. I kind of wish it started at the end of my summer, but it was still fun to watch. But he's at home, so he's at daycare, but I always try to, like, for example, on Friday, he came down with a double ear infection. So I got to kind of go home and split the day with my wife so she can actually go to work too. But that will happen potentially throughout the year this year. So I apologize in advance about maybe needing to leave or step out or potentially cancel an appointment that we've had standing. But I try to avoid that if possible, but got that responsibility at home. Couple different things that I just want to remind you guys about, just some housekeeping, is if you guys are looking for our website, they've done a little bit of work, and I've done a lot of work on my website, but you can actually find it under the programs tab, and the same thing on the, like if you're on your mobile device, you can access it under the school counseling page. That is going to be the place where you're going to get things like your appointments. A few other resources that I'll share with you guys a little bit later on tonight is on that page. There's a bunch of other stuff. For example, the registrar page right above that will be something most likely a little bit later on in the process that you're going to really need to know about, because you'll be doing things like ordering transcripts and potentially taking care of any process and procedure that might need to happen at the end of the year with Blanca, our registrar. So this is kind of an idea of what the school counseling page looks like. We are going to kind of we're going to walk you through a little bit on the college and careers page. I'll actually tab over to that and show you guys a few features that I really want to call attention to that'll be helpful as we go through the senior year process. There's a link to book an appointment. There's also a link to this page where we are recording the videos. You can always watch that later, as long as other things that I'll be posting on there throughout the year. The last thing I'll point out here is There are grade level resource folders. And so what that is that those are specific folders for each grade level as you go through high school. So I try to gather a whole bunch of resources, tools, websites, links, things that you guys send to me, things that I find, things that I have colleagues send my way. And I put it all in one place, whether it's a PDF or a Google Doc or something like that, that you can access at any time, and so can the students. Okay, so instead of printing out a bunch of handouts and stuff like that, for example, the slides from tonight's presentation are already in that folder, so you guys can go and download them later if you guys wanted to. So that's the last thing there. So a couple different things, and while we're on this page, I'll kind of talk a little bit about just senior year in general. How many of you guys have had senior year already, like senior already? Okay, so just 3 of you guys. So tell me what, like, you 3, what did you think, like, how would you describe senior year? Since I haven't had a senior year other than working with seniors. Not to put you on the spot.
A lot of arguing about getting your deadlines done. Okay. They definitely want to check out by the time the second half of the year rolls around. I think my first child and second are very different. I had to crack the whip way more with the first. The second, I think she'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing that more and more from second parents that have gone through. They're like, my second one, I'm good. I got it. Okay. Any different experiences?
Pretty similar.
Okay.
I think just keeping them on, thinking about it and staying active. And I would say the other big challenge was dealing with FAFSA, figuring that all out.
Yeah. So this year will be kind of like almost like your freshman year all over again with your students. Like I feel like at a certain level where it's like a lot of it's new, a lot of it's stuff you've never done before. A lot of it is kind of a little bit nerve-wracking at the same time as exciting. You're going to have you're going to go through the whole gambit of emotions this year. You're going to be excited. You're going to be bummed. You're going to be sad. You're going to cry. You're going to be yelling at each other. Like there's all kinds of stuff that you guys are going to expect, and that's okay. Almost every family does that, and sometimes all at the same time. So don't be worried about that. Just know that it's going to happen. And the big thing is that I want to encourage you guys as parents is just remember I'm sure you guys remember, I wouldn't, I don't think that you guys are like, get out of here. But your kids are going to be leaving next year. Most of them, hopefully. They're going to be gone. And so I want to encourage you guys as parents of seniors to really take the time that you guys have like 8 months, 9 months maybe to kind of like really build that relationship up, because when they go back, it's kind of hard when they're here. But I remember when I was in high school, my relationship with my parents was okay, but it wasn't we weren't like super buddy close. And I feel like it got better actually when I went to college, because I didn't live under the same roof as them all the time. So I was more excited to go home and hang out with my parents and that kind of stuff. And a little bit even more now, because as a parent myself now, I can kind of understand their frustrations and that kind of thing. So I would encourage you guys, set up dates, go and do fun stuff. Don't just make it all about what they're doing right now, what they could be doing better. Really focus on that relationship development piece as well, because before you know it, it'll be done and that relationship changes. It doesn't really disappear, but it definitely kind of morphs into something different depending on what your student ends up doing. A couple norms to kind of help with that process as you guys go through. Okay, so as a parent, one of the big things that I really, really want all of us to do, myself included, is to really think of ourselves more as the coach, okay, versus kind of the participant or the doer. Okay. If for example, I know one of the major frustrations that parents typically share, kind of like you may have expressed, is that my kid wasn't getting the deadlines done. They weren't working on their stuff. They were kind of waiting so long and that kind of thing. And so ultimately, that's something that I want to encourage you guys. And everyone has to kind of monitor their own feelings on this. But I want to encourage you guys to kind of even take a little bit, maybe a further step back than you guys have in the past. Okay. This is really kind of the make it or break it year for your kid regarding kind of like stepping into their own, because it will help them either get to that next phase after this next year's over with their college admissions and having everything ready to go and being ready to kind of step into that next role. Or potentially, if they don't have that opportunity now, to kind of like work on that themselves, to really potentially fall flat on their face when they hit the college, which happened to me. That was a challenge that I had. High school was a breeze. I had not necessarily my parents did everything, but I never really had a challenge. I never really had to figure anything out on my own. And so when I went to college, school was a lot harder. I had a lot more responsibilities I wasn't used to. I had to do my laundry. I had all these other things that maybe I wasn't used to doing at home. And just the sheer amount of it all piling up really was a big challenge for me. Okay, and I've seen it a lot with other students as well. So I would encourage you guys, help them learn that responsibility by phasing it in over this year. And that sometimes means kind of stepping back and letting them have little failures. You know, I don't want them to necessarily like submit their application, but if they get frustrated and they didn't get it done and they don't get to go to that concert they really wanted to go to, that might be a give or take that they have to live with and learn from that experience. So that's just one thing, is to let go, let the college process really be your child's process. Okay, and that high school process really be your child's process. Separate that nuts and bolts from that kind of the emotional piece. Like I said, this is going to be an emotional year. Okay, so really trying to focus on, this is the stuff that needs to get done, and this is really how I feel about it. Sometimes we try to put our feelings into what needs to happen, and that doesn't always relate super well parent to child. Okay, sometimes it relates okay the other direction when we understand you're pissed and you're mad and you don't want us to do this. But when we try to tell them to do something when we're also frustrated with them, it usually sounds like nagging. And I don't know about you, but nagging doesn't work to motivate me either. And so just having a different approach and working on that, just having that cognizantly in your mind will help you guys have a better outcome at the end of the year. The last thing is really that date piece that I encourage you guys to plan on. Not only for that fun piece, and date not in like a romantic sense, but in like a fun sense. Go bowling, go to the beach, get some ice cream. It doesn't have to be a big deal, but maybe just once a month say, hey, we're gonna, every first Thursday of the month, we're gonna get ice cream, we're gonna watch a movie, we're gonna do something fun. And then the second Tuesday of the week or of the month, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna look at the college applications together. Just calendar it out. Set it up so that there are specific times, because otherwise they will tell you, it might not feel like it from our sense. We are a little bit better at managing our time, at timing things out, knowing what needs to happen when as adults. They are not. Okay, so when they know, kind of like when they hear like, I just want to talk about college. I want to talk about college. How's that college application doing? Let's talk about this. They get super overwhelmed, super frustrated, and shut down. And so I'd encourage you guys, set up times, make it very intentional and purposeful. And I think that will help their brains kind of wrap around like, this is the time to talk about this. And they can kind of mentally prepare for that conversation. Otherwise, sometimes they feel like it's almost like an ambush at times. Like you walk in the door, hey, how's it going? Show me your essay. And that doesn't always go super well. Okay, so that's the piece there. We don't have any students in the room, but if they're watching, looking at that college piece, okay, is an important component. So think about it really from the light of, a lot of times when we look at college selection, there is a good portion of it that kind of has to do with the materialism of that school. Okay, not in a bad way, but it's a good way. But they don't really think about it necessarily in terms of the professional side of it. What are we going to get out of this as a profession? Okay, are we choosing this school because it has the best architecture program? Are we choosing this school because it's got a great football team and it's well known? Okay, there are differences, and sometimes they have both, and sometimes they don't. So really look at that list and making sure that students are having some of their priorities in that right order. That's something that I plan on working with the seniors this year for sure, double checking those lists, making sure that we don't have every single Ivy League and no other options on that list. That will be probably a difficult list to complete. Yes?
How are you going to do that? Just, sorry, it's not a trick question, but how are you going to go about doing that and trying to get through all the students?
So I've already started meeting with, kind of skip it. I think I didn't know if I mentioned it or not yet, but we're going to have what are called PSP or Postsecondary Planning meetings. I did send out an email about it, but just so those are about half hour, 45 minutes. I just started doing them today, and where I invite the students, but like I said, I'm the coach. This is the students' kind of road to run. But so I encourage students to invite their parents, but I do not require it. Okay, for seniors, that's not a requirement for me. In my mind, they're close enough to being adults that they are going to be making these decisions and stuff like that. But I would hope and encourage that they definitely would want their parent to be involved in that conversation. So that is something that I've started doing right now. So I would like to have all those meetings done, if possible, by November at the beginning, if not by Thanksgiving break. So we only have 67 seniors this year, pretty small class, whereas the rest of the classes have over 100. So it's a really, really odd dynamic of classes there, but so it won't take me near as long as other classes, but so that's what I'm starting with this year, and then I'll move into our junior meetings as well later on this year. Good question. They should stay organized. I'll show them one or two tricks on another screen towards the end of this presentation with a few tools that I use and help students use. So I'll show you guys how to do that. Deadlines as well, kind of just keep an eye on those things. They are hard deadlines. Whenever you see deadlines, whether it's financial aid, college applications, things like that, those are not budgeable typically. Okay, the only thing that I've ever seen really budge a college application deadline is going to be, there's some up here if you need them. They're going to be things like a hurricane or a tornado or a natural disaster of some type. Okay. Many times they'll, or potentially like a technology outage or something like that. Those are the only things I've ever seen at college say, we're going to give students an extra day or 24 hours or 3 weeks or something like that to kind of like get those applications in. Sometimes it's very localized. So sometimes it'll be only students in this affected region will have extra time. More often than not, it's kind of the entire, they'll just basically extend their deadline by a day or two. But I wouldn't count on it. So just a brief review. I know we've talked about this at prior meetings. This is kind of a rough recipe, I guess, for kind of a diversified application list. Okay, just like you diversify your stocks and bonds, you also want to diversify where you're applying to school. Okay, for a couple different reasons. And this is just a rough suggestion. There's not, if you had 3 reach schools and 1 safety, that's not necessarily the end of the world. This is just what we see end up kind of like typically working best for students. But what the kind of idea and the philosophy behind this is, you want a couple schools on there that, when we say reach safety and target schools, what we're talking about is more of how my application and how my academic portfolio really fits closely potentially with that individual school. Okay, so that might be my SAT scores are within reason. My GPA and course selection are pretty close to what would be expected at this particular school. They have my major, things like that are all going to be determining where these kind of like schools that students have on their list are falling. Okay. For example, reach schools, if you're applying to any Ivy League schools, those will all be reach schools for anybody. I don't care if you're like the next Einstein. Okay, those will all be considered reach schools. Typically, when you can kind of think of it, if you look on the stats page for a lot of like colleges, they'll usually list their admissions rates. We'll talk a few of those in a second. Naviance also has all the schools' admissions rates throughout the years. And so with that, roughly you can kind of break it down almost into thirds. Okay, so most reach schools are going to have about 25% or less admissions rates, maybe up to 30. When you get into the target schools, those are going to kind of be the 30 to 60. Okay, your safety or reach school or kind of fallback or whatever you want to call it, schools are going to kind of be that 60 to 90% in general. Okay, you can also tie it, if you're above their average, that's going to be a little bit more safe than if you're kind of more towards that average or below that average in terms of test scores, GPA, that kind of stuff. Okay, so it's not necessarily if a student has all reach schools, I just get a little bit worried about them getting in. They're playing the stats game against them. Okay, if they have all safety schools, they might be doing what's called undermatching. Okay, what that is like you're not, and you see it typically a lot more with our minority or less represented students in college, where students that they don't really know that I'm a genius and I should be applying to Harvard. They want to go to our junior college, which is nothing bad about junior college, but it might not be the level that they're ready for. Okay, so that's the other side of that coin, is that undermatching. The last thing on there is pretty important too, that every single school that's on that list should be a first choice school, because you might end up at that last choice school because the rest of them don't pan out like we hoped. Okay, so
that seems contradictory. Sorry.
So you should be, so maybe a better way to put it is you should be happy attending at every single school that you apply to, no matter if you get in or not. Like obviously you can have kind of like a hierarchy of like, I prefer this one, but what I see though, and why I say that is because I've seen students literally add a school to their list because they know they can get in and have no idea about the school, have never researched it, don't actually want to go there. And then you get Murphy's Law come in and says, everyone else denies you, you're going to go to this school that you don't even like. Okay, so that's that. We want to avoid adding those schools that don't really have any purpose on that list. So we have all these different options out there. Okay, so there's a number of different ones, and I'm sure there's even more that we could even list up here, but these are the main ones. Okay, like I said, the main ones we're going to be talking about tonight are these top couple. We'll spend a little bit of time here just mentioning a few things. This stuff will probably shuffle into a different category of events just because of the particular focus and how broad that would make this presentation, which doesn't really provide anybody any detailed information. So the 4 main colleges and universities, who can tell me the difference between a college and a university? It's a good question. I had to look it up actually. Say that again. So a lot of community college and junior colleges are called colleges, so that's actually true. The main difference between a college and a university is typically the degrees that they offer, and also that universities are typically composed of colleges. So a college typically only has, like, they don't have, like, a college does not typically have a college of letters and science, a college of business, a college of, you know, natural history, things like that, where a university is typically a larger organization that has subset colleges within it. So there's your trivia for the day. So we're going to look at those 4 main key areas. And there's a couple different types of applications that you'll see within those 4 main key areas. The first couple up here and this last one are the main ones that we'll probably be spending the most time on, and so will your students. Okay. The first one is the Common App. Okay, when we did the junior stuff and when we've done stuff in the past, you probably heard me say the Common App, big C, big A. Okay, so that's a formal title. The Common App is an organization. There's about 600 or so schools. We'll talk through that in a second. But it is a standardized application. That's the word Common Application. School-specific applications are going to be things that individual schools themselves create, manage, disseminate, host, and have submitted to directly. Okay. Many schools, and those are typically a lot of private schools, out-of-state schools, our CSUs and UCs actually fall in down here. They also have little c, little a common applications. Not the formal big corporation with 600 schools, but they are a universal common application that you apply to all of the schools within that system under one application for each of those 2 different ones. Okay. We'll talk all about those in a second. So start with the UCs real quick. So the UCs are based throughout the state. There's 9 of them. Their application has already technically opened. So it's been open since August 1st. You can get online. They can create an account. They can actually get all the way through the application itself, but they cannot submit or pay their fees until November 1st rolls around. Okay. So they have the month of November, those 30 days, to submit that UC application. It's all online. There's no paper option even available. And you do one application for all of the schools themselves. Okay. You're not going to be able to specialize or like change things for the different schools. And you'll fill out the application. You'll tick which boxes you're going to be sending to these different campuses. You'll pay the fee per campus. So it does add up if you do them all. And then it goes off digitally to them. And that's kind of it. All right. The test scores, you can, when you order test scores, so most schools that you're going to be applying, your students, not you, will be applying to, will require official test scores at some point throughout the year. It varies depending on the school of when that actually happens. But those test scores, that would be the SAT or ACT typically, in addition to like the subject tests with the SAT. Those are going to be sent directly from that reporting institution. So the ACT has an ordering kind of portal, as does the SAT. You're going to send those officially to the schools when requested. Most of the time, it's like a little bit later fall. And then those scores will be added to their student information system within the college application itself. With the UC portal, they only have to request one score to one of the schools that they're applying to. And then the rest of the 8 other ones will then have access to that. Okay, so if you're applying to like 6 UCs, don't order 6 test scores. Doesn't make sense, wastes money. Different in the CSU, which we'll talk about. Here's a few stats, and this is kind of the piece that I talked about, the reality and kind of like getting your guys' perspective right in the middle there. Okay, yes?
Sorry.
No, sir.
All this can be in an email, right?
It is, it'll be online. I'll email out the PDF as well with the link to the recording.
Okay.
Definitely. So here's kind of the breakdown for the UC system last. So this is the applicant class from last year. All right. So as you can see, and this is just the UC, I didn't tabulate everything for the CSUs because there's 23 of them, and that's going to take a long time that I don't have. But this gives you an idea for the different UCs. All right. And so as you can see over here, there's a lot of different options and a lot of different availability in terms of how difficult it might be to potentially get in and receive admittance from a UC. Okay, every UC is unique. Every UC has something different that it offers, has a different feel, just like every CSU does. Okay, so we read into a lot of things that sticker power, that kind of like brand image, does impact things like the number of applications. Okay, but UC Merced does turn out similar numbers in terms of quality graduates as Berkeley does. Okay, they have more at Berkeley because they have more students. It's a little bit different campus feel. There's a lot of, there is more name recognition with Berkeley and things like that, but you're still going to get just the quality of the education at, say, Merced or Davis as you would at Berkeley or UCLA. Okay, it's all about kind of what school might fit your individual student. Okay, and it's both from academics, from your personality, from the environment that they might want to be in a college world. Okay, super Republican family, Berkeley might not be the best place for you. I don't know. Vice versa, CSU Bakersfield could potentially not be where your child wants to go. Overall, so system-wide, they had about 171,000 applications. UCLA accounted for 102,000 of those alone. Okay, I do not even know or want to even fathom how an admissions office could even read that many applications. My assumption is they don't. Okay. They say they do. They say we read every single one. And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay. Even if you hired 1,000 people, that would take forever. But it whittles all the way down to 16,000 that they admitted. Okay. And that's actually more than the number that they actually have wanting to show up. All right. Kind of the formula for college admissions works like this. So if you were on the other side of the desk, if I was on the other side of the desk, if you guys were kind of in an admissions office, what they're doing is they're going to get some information from their dean of admissions, their big head honcho in the office that says, this is what our big priorities are this year. Okay. And so they're going to basically say, we know historically we've gotten about 80,000 applications every single year. We know that we actually just built a new dorm. We actually want to try to increase our incoming freshman class by, say, 1,000 students. It's good for the bank. It's good for our campus. We want to kind of increase our campus size a little bit, the diversity, that kind of stuff. And so they say, okay, this year we're going to be targeting our freshman class at, say, 10,000 students that actually show up and kind of like enroll in our school. So they know they're going to start with 85,000. They're going to submit that, send those applications out, and that's their focus for their reading process. They're going to sit back when they get all those applications in. They know that their yield, that's what they call it, their yield is 10,000. It's kind of like a little bit scary and funky words that makes me think of like Big Brother a lot, but they want to yield 10,000 students. But they know that when they admit students, not every single one of them, even schools like Berkeley, not every student that gets admitted ends up going there. Okay, and so their magic formula, they do a lot of data crunching and that kind of stuff. They send admissions notices out to, say, 14,000, knowing they'll probably have about 4,000 students go elsewhere. Okay, the problem is with that kind of formula and that process, and when we talk about admissions types, things like early decision, this is where this kind of really comes into play, is sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes, their goal, kind of like in a business, you want to oversell. This you don't want to oversell. You also don't want to undersell. Okay, you want to hit that number right on. Okay, and so if they admitted 14,000, wanting 10,000, and 13,000 showed up, there's no room in the dorms. Classes don't have space. No more professors. People riot. People lose their jobs, and everyone gets fired. Okay. The other end of the equation, so if they have 14,000, only 8,000 show up and they need to enroll 10,000, now they don't make budget. Now they are in declining enrollment. So it's really, really focused on meeting that magic number. Schools like Berkeley many times don't have quite as much of that issue. They many times have a little bit easier time kind of hitting that magic yield quota just because, you have a lot less students. For example, if you have admitted this many and they wanted 10,000, that's not a very large number that would say no. Okay, but other schools might have, they might admit 14,000 and 6,000 might say no. or something like that. When we're looking at early decision, I think very shortly, maybe not yet, there is a slide that we'll go through that has early decision and different applications types. But I'll just talk briefly about early decision. That's one option that people do have to apply to many different schools. UCs are not one of those options. Okay, it's usually private schools. They'll have an early decision. And what that does, that's typically mainly the one only application type that really does have an admissions major benefit for your student. But there are some admissions major downsides to doing that as well. Okay, the benefit is when you do an early decision, you're basically signing your legal form that says, if you give me admissions, I will now enroll, I will withdraw every single other application I've had submitted or been accepted to, and I will place a deposit immediately. That's what early decision is. Okay, so if your kid comes to you and says, I want to do early decision, it's gonna be helpful. Make sure you please read all the fine print, understand what that means, okay, because it does have lasting ramifications, including your finances, okay? Schools can actually go after you for tuition, even if your student doesn't go there. That's part of the legal process that you guys are kind of signing when we all kind of skip it because we got used to that, the iTunes piece where it's just like skip, okay, yes, I agree. Don't do that with this process, please. Bad idea. It does give you a benefit because in that yield process, remember, they're trying to find out who's going to come and who's actually going to enroll. If they have 1,000 people that sign that early decision, they fit their criteria that they're looking for, that's 9,000 or 1,000 of that 10,000 less that they have to wonder about if they're going to come or not. Okay, so they're that much closer to being correct on that yield calculation than they were before they did early decisions. So that's the benefit that they do, and colleges do look fondly on that. It's not going to make your student that might be a 3.0 student probably get into Harvard. Okay, it's not going to like night and day it, but it's going to, if you're on that fence, that's where it's kind of that magic equation. If you're like, they're like kind of like in committee with your student, and they're like, well, should we admit this student? Should we admit this one? And everything kind of is lining up and being pretty similar. That sometimes is enough to tip one way or the other, is if they do early decision or if they do something similar, have demonstrated interest and stuff like that. So that's where it becomes the fine-tuned pieces. All right, so moving on. There are no letters of recommendation with the UC system. Okay, so you will not need that. That is something that is primarily the independent applications, or almost every single common application will require recommendations. We'll talk about that. Eligibility is based on your A through G coursework. So those are the courses that you'll have. Those are actually typically the only courses that you'll technically be adding to that application as well. Okay, those are going to be all of our A through G approved courses. So things like PE will not appear on your UC or CSU application. On both applications, there are very small sections where you can add relevant coursework that you have taken in the past. Okay, and I highlight relevant. Don't just add stuff because it's got a space, I should add something. Make sure it's relevant. Make sure it kind of makes sense. If you want to be a food scientist, culinary, and maybe in the year that your student took that class was not an A through G course. But it is relevant to that potential future career that you might be pursuing. So it definitely makes a lot of sense to add that. They do require the SAT or ACT, and many of the majors that are highly competitive, like engineering or sciences and that kind of thing, tend to expect, when you see highly recommended, it's pretty much, we expect it to be competitive, the SAT reasoning tests. Okay, so those are gonna be the subject tests. I'm sorry, subject tests, not reasoning tests, I'm thinking wrong. They do also take into account things like leadership, extracurriculars, and that kind of thing. And there are short essay components to each of these schools. And you are writing a general application insight question answer, not one to individual schools. So just know that as well. You're not targeting it to certain schools. All of them are going to see all of your answers. This is comprehensive review. Okay, we're going to breeze through this one pretty quickly. You can read most of this stuff up here. I'm going to highlight one piece in this whole list. But basically what happens is that in the UC system, the faculty senate, which is all of the professors and all the staff and stuff like that, get all together every year and they decide what is our priorities as a staff when we're admitting this next freshman class. They might say, we want less partiers, we want more athletes, we want a more diverse student body, we'd like to really beef up our critical thinking skills, that kind of stuff. It's probably a little bit more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, in 10 seconds, that's kind of what it sounds like. They kind of highlight these 12 or 13 different points. All right, and so your student is considered This is all brought into their application in different ways. Okay, so they're going to look at these things. So it is kind of like when you see the private schools, it's going to be pretty holistic, pretty comprehensive. When we get to CSUs in just a sec, it's going to be pretty not comprehensive. And this kind of like is somewhere right in the middle. They're relatively like straightforward. There's not a lot of wiggle room, but that does give you some options to really expand on just pen and paper academics. One of the things I'm going to highlight here, and this is just kind of for your information, there's only a certain, there's probably about 8 or 9 students that really truly applies to, but I usually get a lot of questions about it every year because sometimes it appears in the application itself. ELC is what's called the eligibility in local context. And what that is, it used to be years and years ago, basically a guarantee that you're going to get into the UCs. Now it's basically another one of these factors that basically adds a little bit more weight to your application. And there's nothing that students need to do to earn ELC. It's not a major factor, but basically what happens is every kind of like late spring after final grades have rolled around in June of their junior year, the UC system themselves asks us for essentially the top 11% of every school gets this, top 11% of GPAs in the given class. That's going to be rising seniors. So we submit those names, not in any particular order. So they get the names and the GPA of each student. And that's how the eligibility in local context is determined. I think they actually whittle it down from that 11% to 9% that actually get it. And that's across the state. And basically what it means now is most of the time they will be able to find you a spot in a UC. Okay, so if your student really wants to go to a UC and they fall on that list, probably will be able to find you a spot. It might not be at the school of your choice or program of your choice though. So that's just another piece, but sometimes people find that in their applications and they get a lot of questions about it. Good news is there's nothing really you guys need to do about it, but it's just information for you guys to know. Personal insight questions, all of them are available on the UC website. The UC website also has a ton of information that I never see students actually looking at. Okay, there's things like a 3 to 5 page kind of like tip sheet directly from the UCs, like hint, here's what we want to see. Okay, download it and read it. That's stuff that's freebies. That's not even like, no one even charges for that. It's just, it's web space. But they need to pick 4 of 8 available questions. Okay, and everyone will tell you, oh, pick this one, this one looks better. Don't worry about it. Pick the one that you feel like you can answer the best, that you feel like talks the best about you as a student. I actually encourage students, if they ask you to write a response for say 4 of say 8 questions, write 6 of them. Do a little bit more work. It's going to take a little bit more time. But what I found is that when I read a student and they picked 4, and those are the only 4 that they picked and they wrote them, if I was to compare that exact same student to someone who picked 6, usually the 5th or 6th one that they wrote actually is way better than like a 1st or 2nd one they might have written. But they only knew that because they actually sat down and wrote those extra essay prompts. So it does take time. Students don't love to do it, but it really does make a big difference. And I can really tell a difference when I read the differences when they try different things. It's going to bring a little bit more out of them. They are 350 words or less. All right. Probably shouldn't be 100 words. Okay. People are just like, does it have to be 350 words? What if it's 349? Like you want to explain yourself as fully as you can, but don't worry about like hitting 350. Okay. They want to read, but they don't want to read fluff. These are the 8 questions. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can find them online at this website. If you just Google UC personal insight questions, boom, it's going to pop right up. Very easy to find. So have your student take a second, at least go through and look at them. Start thinking about what it might be. They're very open-ended questions, super open-ended. What have you done to make your school or community a better place? You could write anything about that, and it's open to interpretation. Filling out the applications, here's a few road bumps that we see. Okay, number 1 is if they get stuck or if you get stuck when you're helping them, please read the instructions. Okay, with 100,000 applications, schools have done a really good job and put a lot of time and energy into making sure that their website and FAQs are fairly good at this point. Okay, so most likely if you've had a question, there's probably 50,000 other students just last year that had the exact same question. So they've done a lot of work writing that up. because otherwise what they do is they get 100,000 emails, 100,000 phone calls. Okay, so it just saves everyone a little bit of time. So please make sure they do that. The other piece that it does is one of the easiest ways to disqualify one of those 100,000 students is seeing if they actually know how to follow directions. They can't read a direction and they can't do it well. It's going to be pretty big red flag right off the bat. So you want to try to avoid that. If you have questions when you're reading the directions, like I've read this, I don't understand what it's really asking me. Those are great questions. Those are the ones we want to try to answer. Okay. If you get stuck, you can call the admissions office. Expect it to take a while. Okay, like 3 or 4 hours on hold while. Okay, depending on the school and depending on the time of year. I remember trying to get a hold of Berkeley in the fall, or sorry, in the later spring, and I had students sitting in the nurse's office for 4 hours. They never got through. Okay, some schools are a lot better, and when I picked up a couple weeks later, I called Berkeley back, and they answered right away. So it very much depends on what's going on in their admissions cycle. You can also make an appointment with me outside of, say, that PSP, the post-secondary planning meeting. We will talk a little bit about kind of that process in that meeting. But for example, I probably won't take a bunch of time and review that if your student has an application ready at that time. That's probably not the best time for that. It'd probably be a good idea for them to make another appointment with me for that in particular, if they want to have me say, take a glance at their essay, read through it, give them suggestions. I'm happy to read essays. I'm happy to read applications. Typically, I ask for at least a week or two to do so, though. Because I'll be writing a lot of applications, reading a lot, writing a lot of letters of recommendations. So it just takes a little bit of time. I got to kind of like stagger it. I can't just be doing that all day for a period of time throughout the fall. We also have RTI sessions that are going to be coming up. Those are the mornings on our block days. So for example, I believe not this week, but the following week, we'll be doing an RTI session on college essay writing. One on these Common App, one on these UC app. One that's just kind of like, I'm gonna be sitting my butt somewhere and they're gonna come and ask me a bunch of questions if they want to. Another common question, and this is new for this year. So if you're like have older students, or if you have, maybe your student is working with other students who've recently applied, we do not report class rank any longer. So if the application in the UCs or CSUs actually asks that question, say no. Okay, so it's not on your student's transcript. It's mainly going to be on the Common App, I believe, but the UC app may ask for your class rank. You should just be able to leave that section blank. Okay, so don't worry about the class rank question. All right, similar situation with the CSUs. Okay, we're going to kind of go a little bit faster through this one because a lot of it's very similar and it's very easy. This is going to be the easiest application that students fill out apart from maybe a junior college application. Okay, the application window for the CSU system, all 23 campuses, is from October 1st to November 30th. They cannot log in and start that yet. That opens for creating an account on CSU Mentor, is what kind of their application is called, on October 1st. Both of these two systems are due November 30th, not December 1st, November 30th. Okay, and I would encourage everybody to plan on having things ready to submit prior to leaving for Thanksgiving break. Okay, do not be the person to submit it the last day and have their computer crash or your hard drive go haywire and internet go out because of a freak snowstorm in November. Just get it done, okay? Because they are not forgiving. They will say, "Tough, you've had 2 months to do this. Why'd you wait till the last day?" And they will literally not, like, you have to go through. There are appeal processes, but if it's something that's avoidable, it's pretty much on you. There are impacted campuses, many of them. At the CSU level, there are different levels of impaction. What that means is they are not necessarily, they're trying to actually decrease some of the enrollment. So they are in the over-enrolled category. They have too many students in different majors or within the entire campus. For example, Cal Poly SLO, they're a campus-wide impacted school. Okay, so what that means is it raises this eligibility index, which we'll talk about. If you wanted to find out which schools are impacted, you could go to this link, but basically, they can have certain majors within a school to be impacted, but everything else isn't. But it does kind of typically raise the bar to be admitted to those programs or schools. So there's no essays and no personal statements and no letters of recommendation. Thus, how easy this is. You're literally going to be entering classes from your transcript and information about yourself and test scores, and that's it, and paying them money. Really, really easy. Okay, the least holistic application probably out there. Okay, you become a number, which is right here. It's called the eligibility index, which basically is your high school GPA times the coefficient, which is 800, plus your SAT score without writing, and that equals an eligibility index, a number. So each school has a minimum. If you're out of state, it changes the minimum. It really is, I don't even know how they do it because it's got to be so many similar students in my mind, or the ACT as well. Most campuses, and I'm assuming it's gone up a little bit. I haven't been to a CSU conference in a couple of years, so I need to probably get back there, but they usually update us on this data. But CSUs, again, are typically the easiest ones to apply to, so I don't spend a ton of time researching those guys. But typically, I would say it's probably closer to 2,900, 3,000, maybe 3,100 when you're adding all these things up in that coefficient. Yes?
What GPA should we be looking for? Like, what GPA would you use there? There are so many different.
So when you're using GPA, so what they do, both the CSU and UC, when we're talking GPA, and that's a great question. I wasn't going to mention that, but it's a really good point. So when you're looking at GPA for those two systems, in our ILPs, I kind of showed you the 6 different ones. If you can think of the transcript, the middle one, weighted, is probably the closest. And I say closest because both systems and many colleges will actually take what we submit as a GPA and they'll actually recalculate it. Okay, so they will actually plug it in because we have a 4-point GPA, other schools have a 5-point GPA, others have a 100-point GPA. There's not really a way unless they do their own system and kind of take grades and give them weighting in themselves. With this CSUs and UCs, they use the A through G, kind of our A through G course lists to really guide that. Okay, so they do kind of use that 4-point rubric, that 4-point scale, and they do weight classes. But for example, they'll cap the number of honors and AP level bonus points at 8 semesters or 4 classes. Okay, they will see an uncapped GPA, a capped GPA to make it equitable across different schools. So if one school has 30 AP classes and one school has 3, got to equal that playing field a little bit. And then they'll see their unweighted GPA. More and more colleges are actually looking at unweighted GPAs than weighted GPAs. Because weighting is arbitrary, completely arbitrary by the school. There is no standard of weight. We weight 1 point, other schools weight a 1/4 point. We don't weight honors courses. Other schools weight honors courses 1 point or a 1/4 point or 1/2 point. There's very little oversight in terms of guidance of that. With the CSUs and UCs and the A through G list, they do monitor and have policies with only the ones that have that. If you looked at our course list type of thing, it would show a little star, which would mean it qualifies for UC and CSU honors. So all of our AP courses, for example, receive that weighting at the UCs. But that's kind of the piece. So I actually kind of this will be that UC CSU GPA, that 10 through 12 weighted GPA that they're going to be using within reason there. Like I said, many times if your student is taking 6 or 7 AP classes, just remember it might be a little bit less because of that capping situation. But it's pretty close. That's the closest one I would use. There's not really a great way to just totally go through and calculate it. If you live in Nevada, sorry, but you're probably in that 3,500 range. You're going to be out-of-state students are expected to, have a higher level of standard. And UCs and CSUs have been under a lot of shtick lately because they've been admitting so many out-of-state students. Probably, makes sense to me to a certain level, for the money. They're getting hit by budgets and stuff like that. If you can charge someone $60,000 and someone $30,000, sign me up for the $60,000 one. I'll take the extra money. Thank you very much. So they got a lot of hammering in the press and stuff like that because they kind of had that increasing out-of-state and international student enrollment without really increasing the in-state students as well. But they've kind of backpedaled on that. They kind of felt the sting and are really focusing on our in-state students, which is what they're designed to serve. Yes.
So quick question, the eligibility index, the 2 formulas they use there, is that a choice on the application or is
no, it's dependent on what, I guess it could be depending on what scores you sent in, but they're going to use your best, if you sent in an SAT and an ACT, they're going to use whatever one they can qualify you the best at. Yeah. So college admissions officers are not evil. They are good. They are actually trying to help. They are trying to, they want to. So a lot of people think that admissions officers, their goal is to not deny people. Their goal is to actually admit the most qualified students. Okay, and they hate, believe it or not, like I talked to a lot of them, they hate actually denying students. It's a bummer for them, just like everybody else. But they are going to give the students the benefit of the doubt. If they can admit you based on a criteria, they're going to use that criteria. Okay, so they're not out to get your student. They're really just trying to use whatever they can if they can admit their students. So if you submit an SAT and an ACT score and you have a higher eligibility index with the SAT versus ACT, they're going to go with the SAT. They're going to give you that benefit of the doubt. Like, you show us what you can do, we'll let you use it. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Jeff. What my research has said, like CSU's and UC's average graduation rates are between 5 and 6 years.
Yep.
Is that your research?
Yeah. So especially in programs like engineering and some of the more technical programs and some of the larger, more impacted campuses, for example, Cal Poly is another one I have personal experience with. Average graduation for an engineering major is between 5 and 6 years at this point, unless you're taking like 20 quarter units a semester or a quarter, which is a lot. That's like 6 quarter classes. It's really, really crazy. Most students that do it, like, that means no working, no sports, no real fun. Like, you're in it to win it, academics. Then you can hypothetically get through in 4 years. But most students that are reasonable or like sane don't really do that. But yeah, there are a lot of them that will be something we talk about a little bit with private school versus say in-state and public and that kind of stuff is there are, a lot of private schools out there are using that as kind of like a marketing tool. They will say, we will get your student through in 4 years as a guarantee. Okay. And there is merit to that. Like, when you think about it, if your student can get through in 4 years instead of 5, even if the school costs twice as much per year, $60,000 versus $30,000. If you can, like, if that one extra year, okay, that's an extra, say, $60,000 on top of it. The other piece that people don't really think about is the lost earn potential. Okay, if you don't graduate in 4 years, your working kind of life is shorter. You're going to be earning less, plus your earning kind of maxes out a little bit later in your life. Okay, so you actually don't just have to pay extra tuition for that extra year, but you're also missing out on, say, the average of $45,000 in that first year of work. So it's a $100,000 difference potentially by graduating in 4 years versus 5. Okay, so it is, but yes, I've seen that. Same thing with like our junior college system. California's junior college system, while it's a great system, they do struggle, and the main reason is because I believe that they have the open enrollment policy. They're going to admit there's not an application. You're admitted if you meet some pretty simple criteria. So they're going to let you into that class or their school no matter what, but that doesn't mean that they're going to offer courses for everybody. Okay, and sometimes that's starting to become somewhat similar at some of the four-year colleges as well. So that 2-year transfer process at a junior college many times actually becomes a 3 or 4 year transfer process to that next level. Not necessarily because like you're not taking the classes you should, but you might not be able to get the classes that you should. You might not be able to get in. It might not be offered in certain semesters, which throws off your entire sequence, which also can happen at the 4-year college level as well. One big thing that I also kind of give a small tip about is if you do not want your student to have that 5-year graduation plan, make sure, and it might be a little late now, but if you have younger ones, make sure that they are not remedial. Okay. A big thing that also throws off student sequences is having to take remediation courses, often in math. Okay, so if students are behind in math, they will oftentimes potentially not have prerequisites to take certain other classes like chemistry or say another math course that's part of their major sequence. That really slows them down. They're doing their best to kind of sequence them, put them in, say in like the summer time frame or like a Ready Start program, that kind of stuff, but it's not quite the same as if they were just ready to rock and roll in that freshman level math or English class. So that's just a big thing. Might not have a ton of influence now on your seniors, but if you have younger kids, it is a big influence in terms of that graduation rate. So a couple of the most competitive, again, kind of like that 1/3, 30% admissions rates are going to be Cal Poly, Long Beach, San Diego State. Those are the top 3 in terms of the number of applications. The bottom 3, but again, not necessarily less, just less popular, are Sonoma State, Humboldt State, Stanislaus, Chico, and San Bernardino, upwards of 70 to 80%. Believe it or not, Sonoma State apart from Sacramento State and Sierra College, this last year, I believe, was our #1 school that we sent students to. Okay, so it's an up and comer. So that's just a couple to keep in your mind on, but there are a lot, just like with UCs, there's a lot of different schools out there depending on what your options are for next year. So again, with the CSUs, you're gonna be sending test scores. They use what's called CSU Mentor, and that's a campus. So when you're on, say, for example, the ACT or SAT score site, your students will probably know more about this than you. You're gonna send it to that campus. You don't need to send it to every single CSU. Send it to one place. It's the campus in Long Beach, and that will get all of your CSUs out there, okay? The last thing is, and this goes for any application, do not try to like, oh, I think I took culinary in my freshman year. No. Get your transcript, print it out, have it in front of you. It needs to match exactly. One reason is because for both these systems, you're doing what's called self-reported grades, self-reported courses. Okay, so you're gonna list them all in this application with your grades, with the classes you took and when you took them, okay? If for some reason you're like, oh, shoot, I misread my transcript and I put a C when I really had an F, or an A when I really had a B, like sometimes those are gonna be not that big of a deal, but you know, if it's a big enough deal, so it takes you from qualifying for A through G to not qualifying for A through G when you really didn't, it can actually, they'll rescind applications because we don't send these schools transcripts until after you've graduated. So they will actually, they verify basically your requirements that you self-reported. So if you do not self-report accurately, you might be in trouble, okay? Again, depending on how kind of like big the deal that is that you made a mistake on. All right, some private schools, deadlines do vary. So please make sure you have that in mind. They have all these different application types. We'll talk the early decision and stuff. I have a different slide for that. They do need, most of them only require letters of recommendation. Okay, so let's talk briefly about that. Letters of recommendation and your essay are two major ways, apart from like an interview, that you can really breathe life into your application or your students' applications. That really shows kind of like what a student is into, how well they write really does matter to schools as well. But the recommendation gives context into what a student can or cannot do inside of a classroom. Okay, so many schools will require, you know, one from a teacher, potentially a few more, and then typically a counselor letter of recommendation. Okay, my kind of rule of thumb regarding this, and the teachers similarly, is we require 2 weeks. Okay, so please do not come ask me the day before as I'm walking out the door. May or may not happen. Lucky for those students, made it work, but it might not always be possible. Okay, so just understand that. I also have an office that I can shut my door. Teachers do not have an office that they can shut their door. They're teaching most of the day. Okay, so their availability to write a letter of recommendation is much, much more limited than say mine is. Okay, so they definitely require 2 weeks, kind of no exception there. The senior profile that I put up here, it's also online in a digital format. I would highly encourage students to fill it out that way. It makes it legible and easy to read. I can also copy and paste. I do not even start a letter of recommendation until I have that in my hand. Most teachers will not either. It's basically your kind of brag sheet. Okay, we know your students, we like your students, most of them, but we don't know everything about your students. There's a lot of great things that we have no idea maybe your students were involved in. Maybe we don't know that they're a Boy Scout. Maybe we don't know that they are, you know, this rock star. Okay, so that's stuff that maybe we wouldn't know here at school. So that's stuff we like to find out because that gives a lot of context that we can actually use in a letter of recommendation. Just because I might not have been their bandmate does not mean I can't talk about it in a letter. The other piece is this letter of recommendation piece is not a mandate. Okay, your teachers, myself, we can say no. It's not something that we are required to write. I would like to say that I'd probably write most students a letter of recommendation. There's a couple of reasons why I potentially wouldn't be able to though. Number one is if I wouldn't recommend you. If I don't know that you would be, if you have really shown to be not a great college candidate, to be not a very trustworthy person, I would have a hard time probably writing a solid recommendation. Okay, and many times I will just say no versus write a poor one. And most people, most professionals would do the same thing. They would rather not write one than try, you know, it's cruel and unusual punishment to write a bad letter of recommendation and submit it. Okay, so I would simply just say, no, I can't write you a letter of recommendation. And there are options for us to do so. But the other reason would be maybe I don't know your student. Okay, and that's the other end of the spectrum too, is that's kind of like if you remember way back in like 9th or 10th grade when we met and said, making those relationships with people that work on campus, your teachers, your counselor, your parents, all that stuff is really important for students. Okay, this is when it starts to pay off. Hopefully it paid off before that, but this is really, when we write these letters, it really makes a difference. If I can't give any specifics about your student, that doesn't make a very compelling letter. Okay, and so that might be one reason. I have a senior that just showed up this year, like 3 weeks ago. I have no idea other than their name, and I probably can't remember their name. I'm not going to be writing a letter for that student. I think it would not be fair to that student to try to do that. So that would be another situation where I would probably say no. Many of those times, if I can't write one, I would offer, and many teachers might too. If you're doing it with the teacher, you can probably find a different teacher. Okay, I'm the only counselor here. So if I can't write one, I often will suggest, and maybe I like the kid, I just don't really know them. I would probably say, is there someone else around that you would feel like can represent you well? My only requirement with that is that I get to read the letter before I kind of pseudo sign my name to it by sending it in place of mine. Okay, so that's something if, for example, if you moved in recently or that kind of stuff, I'm happy to do that. But the reason why I read it is because I have had circumstances where I know for a fact things are false in this letter and they get written by someone else, and no way am I signing my name to that. Okay, and so when you're looking at college admissions, a lot of it has to do with integrity. A lot of it has to do with how well your name stands up against others. And so if I'm going to blemish that with colleges and stuff like that, it kind of lessens my impact on other students' recommendations when it ends up kind of coming to light, which it often does. The different application types. The main two are going to be your regular decision, and you'll see a lot of early actions actually. There are a lot less, it kind of fluctuates given on the year, but early decisions. So on this right-hand side, these are what are called restrictive. Okay, and those are the ones really to pay attention to. All right, especially early decision or ED. You'll see it oftentimes as an acronym. Early decision is what we talked about a little bit earlier this evening, where it does give you a little bit of a benefit, but you are basically signing your life away. All right, you will only be able to apply to one school early decision. And again, there will be a stipulation that you have to then withdraw your applications if they do admit you immediately, and also place a deposit. That is binding, and typically there are legal ramifications. Restrictive early action and early action. There's not huge or even many times any major application benefit. So you're not going to like one-up someone else because you did early action necessarily. The major benefit is more for the student and the family. Okay, that usually has an earlier deadline than what their maybe major deadline might be. For example, a lot of early action deadlines might be like November 15th, whereas the regular might be January 1st. All right, so if students meet that early, submit early action, what that does is it gives colleges almost a head start in reading. Okay, so instead of having 2 months to figure this out, they now have 5 months, and they can kind of start working on it. The benefit for you as a family is the student might know their decision earlier. Okay, so instead of knowing in March, you might know in February or January or something like that. Some schools will let you apply early action, and if you get denied, they'll do what's called defer you. So they'll put you in the regular decision pool. So if you get denied early action, they'll put you back in there and see how you compare against the rest of the fish in the pond. Other schools will deny you outright. You get one go, whether you do early action or regular. Okay, and there's probably people in both camps, whether if you're kind of in that group, whether you should do regular or early action. I have no opinion in either matter. I think if you're kind of on there, it's probably somewhat of a crapshoot anyways, whichever way you go. You're probably going to be right on that line, either application pool. Rolling admissions is going to be your most lenient, okay, and also the quickest turnaround in terms of how quickly you hear back that decision. Montana State is probably the most famous one that you might have heard of. You might have sons or daughters that have already gotten an application result back from them. They're open like all year almost, and like literally it's like 2 or 3 weeks, if not sooner, that you have an admissions decision back. UNR is typically another one that's rolling admissions. So you'll typically see rolling admissions more at schools that are, again, not less, just less popular. They don't have to deal with the differences in the admissions numbers and have to read hundreds of thousands of applications, they usually have space for most students that apply for their school if they get in. You also see it more at schools that are in that upper percentage of admissions rates. They don't have to be as selective, so the reading is not quite as lengthy and kind of daunting for that admissions office. Regular decision is your very typical type of application. They're going to have a start date and a submit date, and you're going to hear back a couple months later. Okay. So, restrictive early action is typically means that they limit the number of other schools that you can apply either early decision or early action at. Okay. Stanford is a good example of that one. They do a restrictive early action. They don't do early decision, I don't believe, anymore. But they do a restrictive early action, which means you can only apply there early, not anywhere else. Any questions on any of that? We're going to try to hustle through some of this. So Common App, actually, we're actually pretty close to being done, I think.
I have a question on SATs. Is it obvious on the applications and how do you know which schools do this, the super score for the SATs?
Some schools will list it on their websites. You might have to dig through their admissions websites. There's not like a magic listing that I know of. The good news is it's not really that important. You don't really have a choice. You don't really get to choose if you want to super score or not. They're either going to super score everybody or they're going to super score nobody. The only thing that might matter would be like knowing kind of what your super score was compared to what their, what other students might be to kind of figure out how they fall in that pool. But when you're looking at data from things like on college websites or on Naviance, that kind of stuff, they're not listing super scored SAT scores. They're usually listing kind of like the average across the board. So it's not, I don't know of a way unless they list it, which I don't see very often when I look at college websites. I could potentially poke around and see if I can find a list, but I haven't found one yet. Good question though. Any other questions about any of that stuff? We'll have some questions at the end too. A couple other last things about the Common Application itself. So again, you're going to apply online. Pretty much every application, unless you're going to have institutional applications, which will be our last quick touch point, is going to be digital. There's almost no paper applications anymore. They do have sometimes supplemental forms. So when you fill out the Common Application, it kind of looks like this. Your students are going to go to commonapp.org. They're going to create an account. Use your real name. Use your professional email account. Okay, don't use some funky middle school email. They're going to see that email. Okay, so you want it to be everything kind of like up and up on your email account. So they create an account. They'll probably fill out some profile information. So that's going to be address, phone number, all that good stuff. They'll be able to start adding schools. They'll have a school list. Okay, I suggest adding schools early because what that does, it also populates the supplemental material list. Okay, so in the Common App, like I said, it's a Common Application. There's almost two sections of the app. Okay, there's the Common App, which means you're going to fill out the same stuff for every single school that you end up applying to within the Common Application itself. That's going to be the same essays. It's going to be the same information. Okay, and you'll select essays within the Common App. There will be some shorter essays, not quite as short as the UC ones, that are going to go to every single school that you apply to. So there's going to be general essays. You're not going to want to make them very specific. You do get to choose a couple different topics, but those are going to be the same. And then once you actually add the schools that you're going to be applying to through the Common App, each school has the option. It's not always the case, but sometimes they'll have the option of having what's called supplemental essays or supplemental materials. Sometimes that's going to be an art portfolio or a music submission. Many times they're essays or written components. Okay, so you want to see what those are. You do not want to wait until a deadline and then add your school and find out I have to write 4,000 words in an essay about why I love your school and quantum mechanics. Like that would be very difficult and you'll want to be surprised with that. So add them on early. You can always take them off or just simply not apply later. There's no penalty. No one even knows that it was on there unless you submit to that individual school. Okay, so add those on there sooner rather than later. Once you get through the application, you're going to submit applications individually to the different schools. So you're not going to submit all of them at once. You can do the same thing with the CSU and UCs. You don't have to submit all of them at once. Oh, and before I forget with the CSU, sorry, we're jumping back. I just had to memory come back to me about last year where a student had a confusion. They actually started their application over again because they did not submit their first one before going on to the next one. So with the CSU application, you complete one application fully, submit it to, say, Cal Poly, okay? And then what you do is you go back in after you've submitted that and you just pick another school and you submit it. If you don't do that, if you haven't submitted that, it's gonna basically start you from scratch again. You have to kind of start over. You won't lose this one, but once you submit it, you can basically copy. Okay, so if you do that, it's just finish one and then you can submit all the other ones. You can literally submit it within like 10 minutes after that. Like it's not something you have to wait for, but get all the way through one and then submit your other ones if you're doing multiple CSU apps.
Just CSUs, UCs.
UCs you tick off as you go through.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's it. They run on different systems, and the CSU you'll find is a little bit more antiquated than the UC one. Common App, we send all of our documents. So teachers and myself will send all of our documents digitally to the schools. Okay, so I had a couple of students ask about, okay, what do I do with my transcripts? How do I get them there? Okay, I send transcripts pretty much automatically for your first transcript. So once you applied, if you've applied by the time I submit a recommendation, then that automatically goes. If you haven't applied by the time I submit my stuff, basically it should go into like a holding pattern, and as soon as you submit, it should automatically go to your schools. We are going to be using the Common App, not the Naviance integration this year. So if you had older students, we will not be sending recommendations through Naviance this year. We're kind of comparing and contrasting the two systems and seeing which one's going to be more beneficial for students, parents, and teachers and myself. Okay, so this one, everything's going to be going through the Common App, very similar to if we didn't have Naviance in that sense. Okay, but you still can use it. We'll still expect students to say upload their college list to Naviance. I'll still be utilizing it very frequently. We can still send transcripts that way, just not through the Common App. We send a school report, which has information about your rank, GPA, well, not rank anymore, but GPA, transcripts, classes, that kind of stuff, as well as my recommendation form. That's the first document that gets sent with your applications. We also send mid-year reports to every single one that will accept it on the Common App. It doesn't go anywhere else but Common App. What that is, it's basically, roughly, it's basically an updated transcript showing first semester grades, and thus the reason to avoid senioritis. Okay, so colleges will see that, and they want to see that because that's usually when they're right about to make actual decisions and send out letters. So they want to know, I had this student get 3 Fs in their first semester. We're not going to have that kid at my school. Okay, it actually is probably better if that's the case, because other schools, what will happen is you probably, if you apply to a UC and that happened as a student, you would probably get an admissions notice. And then in June, they'll actually get your transcript and they'll say, wait, this is not what we kind of agreed on. We're expecting very similar types of grades. We actually don't want you at our school anymore. So sorry, you're gonna have to go find somewhere else. Okay, so that is what happens. They can rescind stuff, and it happens later, like in June, because they don't actually see that many times unless you self-report those poor grades to that school, which I encourage, but no one really ever listens to me in that circumstance, usually because they're kind of embarrassed, but that's the piece. Briefly, so I'm gonna try to do financial aid in 5 minutes and spend 5 minutes or so on questions. Does that sound okay? Okay. Financial aid in a nutshell to get you ready for October 4th. Roughly what's going to happen is on October 1st, the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, that is the national federal application for financial aid that almost every school will take and many schools require if they want to give you free money. Okay. I encourage every single student, barring potentially if you have immigration issues. There's some question this year based on what's going on in politics and stuff like that. There's been kind of differing opinions in the college admissions world regarding that piece. So we're working on that one. But if you're totally cool with it, immigration, you're a U.S. citizen, everyone, in my opinion, should be filling out the FAFSA. Doesn't take super long. They've actually made the process a lot more seamless, a lot easier. That actually integrates with the IRS. You can literally connect it to your IRS. It'll pull the information. We are now in what's called prior year, meaning it will be the 2016 tax information that you guys will be using So not this year that you guys will be submitting in April, but the one that we have, the most recent one that we have fully completed and have all of our tax returns for them, unless we have like some weird extension or something. So that's going to be the tax year that you'll be starting with, and then we'll kind of keep going forward as the years go on. That being said, everyone should submit it because I don't care if you make $10 million. Most people like free money. Okay, most people, if you apply or if you don't apply, many times you might not qualify for certain scholarships, maybe a grant that might be offered through a school that might not be need-based. Okay, a lot of free money that comes from like the government or California is often what's called need-based aid, which is dependent on your financial situation. There's also merit-based aid, which is dependent on how good you are at something or what you can bring to the table, basically. Okay. Oftentimes you see a lot of academics. You see potentially athletics, different skills you might have outside of school. But oftentimes, if you don't fill out that FAFSA, you can't give them an EFC or expected family contribution, which is a number you get back. The FAFSA doesn't actually give you any money. The FAFSA just reports to different colleges. This is how much, based on our calculations and our kind of financial, numbering, we would expect this family in this year to reasonably expect to pay for their child's continuing education, which there is an expectation on you, just so you know. It's not free. You're not just like they're out of here, they're 18, they're on their own. Okay, even if you said you're not getting any money from us, they will still have an expectation on their financial aid based on your financials. Okay, even if you're giving them nothing. Okay, so just know that it's kind of rough for some students because that's what parents do. They'll say, we're not giving you a dime. You're on your own, go get a job. And basically, that parent might make $100,000 a year and that kid might not get get the full amount of aid they might need. There are some ways around in those circumstances, but that's all on the college side, and it's all up to the college's individual judgment on that piece. Once they get the EFC, the colleges will then look at their cost of attendance, or COA. You're going to get a lot of acronyms over the next couple of weeks. COA is the cost of attendance, and that's average across the board for everybody. Okay, so it doesn't matter, if you're going to school in New York, you're probably going to be averaged. Your transportation costs are going to be average. Someone say driving somewhere. Okay, so you have to kind of factor in distance as well. How are you going to get to and from school? How many times are you going to get to and from school? Are you going to own a car? Are you going to take public transportation? All those things are not always kind of like item by item added into that cost of attendance. So it could be more, it could be less. That cost of attendance, basically they see that EFC, the difference between that EFC, so say if the cost of attendance, we'll use $60,000 again, we're going to NYU, and they say, okay, your EFC is $10,000, meaning your family should be expecting to pay $10,000 a year, kind of no matter what. You got to come up with that money somewhere. That leaves you, your need is $50,000. All right, and so what the college's job is to do is to basically try the best way to figure out how do we meet that need. Okay, so they might give you, okay, well, your student was a pretty good student, so here's $20,000 for being a good student. That is not $20,000 check, that is a $20,000 tuition discount. Okay, so they will not be walking out with that money. But they'll get that $20,000. All right, now we're down to say another, $20,000 left in that need. Okay, what they'll do is they'll probably say, okay, you look like you'll probably qualify based on your income for maybe a $10,000 subsidized loan. And they'll say, okay, here's $10,000 loan. You can choose to take that or not. Subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized basically means that the federal government, often it's a federal loan, will pay the income tax or the income interest, wrong word, interest as long as you typically are half-time or higher in school. So a $5,000 loan, as long as you're in school, that's subsidized, will still be a $5,000 loan when you finish school at least half-time. Unsubsidized is the opposite. Interest starts accruing at that point. Both of those typically are offered by the government, so many of them have a much lower interest rate than, say, if you walked into Chase Bank. Okay, so those are the way to go if you need to take out loans, which often people do. So don't be like, we're not taking out loans. Like, it's usually what makes education accessible for students. You just have to do it responsibly. Okay, so you want to know kind of what the big picture looks like when you're looking at loans and what they're using it for. And that's a big conversation you as a family should be having with your students as you guys go through is, we have this much money budgeted for your college tuition. That is not beer kegs. That is not car payments. That is not, flying to Cancun. Okay, that is books. That is tuition. That is room and board. Okay, and having expectations of what those things look like. Not like they're going to go buy beer kegs, but it is college. You never know. So that's the piece that they have. So you have $10,000 left in that calculation. They might say, that's all we can give you. That is what's called a gap. That is a financial aid gap. That means you have $10,000 on top of the $10,000 that you already owe, that they're already expecting from you. You have to come up with that somewhere. So that's the only money they're going to give you. Okay. And so oftentimes that could be a big decision maker when you get to like April and May, is how much of a gap do we have? How close are we to making this work? Okay. Do we have a 529 in place? Do we have money set aside for this? Or are we going to be kind of like second mortgaging our house and like, you know, making this work there? It also is a decision your child will have to make as well. If you guys say this is how much we have to give you, this is what we're not budgeting beyond that, I encourage you to stick with that. If they really want to go to that school, they're an adult, most of them. But they're old enough, if they want to do that, hopefully you can talk a little sense into them. I think it's a really bad idea, but they are perfectly capable of signing their own loan paperwork, and paying that back later, and maybe living in your basement. But that's the case that it might be. Okay, so I don't encourage students doing that. Just hear me out, but it is an option. If they really want to go to NYU and you can't make the finances line up, they can still go to NYU if they can make all the money come together, but it might cost them big in the long run. Okay. The other piece about finances that I'll just remind you about is we're not taught, when you look at those packages, they're 1 year. Okay, 1 year. So if we're looking at $20,000 of gap, we're talking 1 year times 4, maybe 5, maybe 6. Okay, so there's another benefit of trying to get out in 4 years. So that's kind of the financial aid package in 5 minutes or less. I did pretty good. The only last one is there are about 150 or so schools that use an additional supplemental financial aid application called the CSS profile. Okay, that is it's an application that is run by the College Board, same group that does the SATs and AP tests. CSS, the word, I don't even know what the acronym stands for, but CSS profile. If you just Google CSS profile schools, there'll be a list of all of the schools that require it and some information about them. Many times when you look at that list, what you'll see is they're going to be a lot of them are going to be that kind of typically 15% or so admissions rates or less, super expensive schools, or some like very unique schools that have unique funding structures. But basically what happens is if the FAFSA is kind of like your realtor walking in the house, taking a walk around, I think we could sell this thing for $400,000. This is your home inspector that's going to come rip up your carpet and look in the walls. Okay, so it's going to go much, much deeper. It's going to take into account a lot of things. For example, the FAFSA is a custodial parent. Takes into account the income of the custodial parent or whoever the student spends 51% or more time with. The CSS profile will take into account everybody. So if you are getting money from your grandparents, it's going to count. If you're going to get money from your ex-husband, it's going to count. You know, they're going to take into that because in their opinion on that component, even if you're divorced or separated, that parent still has an obligation to pay for their child's education. And if they make $10 million and you make nothing, it's still all going to go together like that. Okay, so just a warning about that is it's a little bit more involved, and sometimes it has a little bit earlier start time. So you might want to look that up if you're looking at those schools. Again, usually kind of more of the kind of like quote unquote upper tiered schools or much, much pricier schools. We're talking like NYU, Stanford, Harvard, things like that. Okay. Again, we'll talk some more specifics about that. We'll go through scholarships. Don't worry, they're not out yet. And all that stuff on October 4th as we go a little bit deeper into financial aid in particular. I'll walk you through a few examples with that. Again, please book those post-secondary planning meetings with me in the next couple weeks. It's not a bad thing to spread them out. We're not in a huge hurry to get it figured out, but if you wanted to book sooner rather than later, probably do that sooner rather than later because my schedule will book up and I only book 4 of them a day. I need to kind of like balance my schedule out a little bit to be able to take care of other stuff as well. Does anybody have any questions? Wow, you guys got it under the gun. All right. Well, if you guys have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out or set up an appointment with me. Anytime the fall is a big focus on the seniors. So you guys are kind of like priority number 1 for me over the next couple months. So if you guys have questions, please don't hesitate. Send your student to me. You guys can set up appointments. You guys can come together. You can come separately. Doesn't bother me either way. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.